Hey Keith, your mic sounds like a chipmunk. Still, still sounds like a chipmunk.
Yeah, the audio is not working.
Test, test.
That's
There you
better.
go.
Is that
That-
better for you?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thanks for letting me know that. That happened to me last week when I was doing training, and everybody started laughing, and I couldn't understand what was going on. So they thought they had Alvin and the Chipmunks. So we'll charge you extra for that little deal. I should have sang a song. We would have been millionaires, you know? So it's good to have everybody this morning. So last week, so this month, I hope you've had a good month. I was very blessed last week. I was a dinner keynote for the Mid-Missouri chapter. So if any of you are on here from there, so thank you for inviting me up to do that at Lake of the Ozarks. That was fun. And so at Margaritaville, so that was a fun time. And so I talked about AI in project management. And so that was a fun topic. I had a good time. I hope everybody else did. Today, though, we're going to be talking about communicating on the project with clarity and specific information. So this is kind of a heavy topic. Most of you already know this statistic. If you've attended other training, when someone has a project that bites the dust, when they're surveyed, the team is surveyed. They say about 85% of the time they talk about bad communication, getting the wrong communication, bad communication. Communication was lagging behind what they really needed. All of this mounts up to what we struggle with is how and when to communicate about the project. So we're going to talk about a few of these pieces today with you. So let's start off with the first part of this, importance of clear communication in projects. So it enhances stakeholder engagement, collaboration, it facilitates problem solving, it mitigates the risk and minimizes understanding. So when we get into this thing of communicating, we all think we communicate very well, but so many times in a project, that's what happens. We don't know necessarily what somebody is not receiving that they want to receive. And that's one of the reasons why if you're doing traditional project management, you're normally creating a communication plan, but it's so that people get the right information. But the problem that we have is these projects that are trying to get into recovery, or we're trying to do turnarounds with them. Now, most of us use some type of model. Even PMI actually has a communication model, which is a standard business model, but your model will differ a little bit based on your best communications where you're looking at in traditional, which the PMBOK has historically followed. Now they're doing both agile and traditional. And then agile is going to follow a little different model because the idea is co-location and that we all are communicating face to face. And then the third is going to be hybrid, which is going to be a mixed bag. And that's what many of you have. You've got people who are maybe dispersed working on that project. You might have people that are co-located. So the way you communicate to some people might be totally different than you're communicating to others based on location alone with all of the folks. So let's talk for just a moment about the traditional. Traditional communication has historically been what PMBOK has positioned. It goes all the way back to Shannon and Weaver in 1949. And so they laid out a traditional communication model. That model has been used by many formal organizations like crazy. And the idea behind it was you communicate to the right people. And we've all heard the phrase, communicate on an as need to know basis. And if you don't know, it's because you don't need to know, that kind of mindset. Of course, that kind of hurts in project management too, but we've all heard that type of situation. So you understand who is the correct person to talk to. So this model here has been really a great model when you're talking about formal organization. You go up the chain of command. We've all heard those. You talk to your boss who talks to their boss and those type of things. And so this communication model has been around a long time. And so what you're looking at here is just what we're familiar with if you've worked in a formal organization. The team members talk to the project manager, who talks to the project director, who talks to the CFO or CEO or whoever. And so most of us understand this one. This one we understand because of the chain of command. And if you're working for a really old organization, you probably have some of this. The agile side, though, is something that is evolving. Even though it's been around some 20 plus years, we still are evolving on how to communicate because it shifts the communication paradigm. I'm not communicating upline. I'm talking to whoever I need to talk with. I'm being able to communicate with the project manager plus the customer plus the user plus the vendor if I need to. It supports the information radiators of trying to make sure that we have high visibility and transparency so everybody knows what's happening or what's not happening on the project. Cockburn and Cohen in 2006 brought in that idea of the daily stand-up meeting. So all of you folks who are doing Agile or Scrum, you know what I'm talking about. 15-minute meeting every morning to communicate what happened yesterday, what you're doing today, and any kind of hurdles or any kind of impediments that you're doing. Great communication model, but it doesn't fit every project and doesn't fit every culture. And so that creates a little bit of a challenge in that situation there. And so here's what your Agile communication model might look like. You've got the customer, and though they're normally communicating in Agile or in Scrum through the product owner. And the product owner, you know, is the person who's controlling the features, the ranking of the user stories or ranking of the features. And then, of course, the product owner is communicating to the project team who's doing the estimates and working with them to come up with the sprint backlog of what work's going to be done in that sprint. So this model works very well. The team is very fluid in being able to talk to anybody they want to. And so this works very well in that situation. But once again, this can be a challenge too of trying to communicate with someone who maybe is even outside of that project as well. And then, of course, you're handing something off to that customer at the end of each sprint so the customer can begin giving feedback. Once again, high engagement of that customer. Now, your challenge here, as we all know, is what happens if the customer doesn't want that high engagement? In traditional, they might not be necessary, but in Agile, it is absolutely necessary. That customer has to be engaged. And so that creates a little bit of a challenge. And so what you find is that engagement back and forth. And then hybrid is kind of a mixed bag. So it can use communication models very much like traditional, just like we talked about, or it can use the Agile model with stand-up meetings if we choose to. It's what makes most sense for your project. And so the two models that support hybrid best, one is called stakeholder engagement model, and it adjusts the communication based on the stakeholder's role, responsibility, and authority. And so how much do I need to really engage in that stakeholder? And so that takes a page out of PMBOK 5 and 6 where it talks about stakeholder engagement plan, okay? Then the second one would be the tailored model. And this is the one that you probably would find very useful in a hybrid project, because if you're not familiar with hybrid is using traditional for a portion of it, and then you're using Agile or Scrum for another portion of it. And so you're having to adjust the processes depending on what you're trying to do. But the tailored communication customizes the communication to that specific person. In other words, I have to talk with this person who I might not normally need to talk with. So what does that person need to know from me? What do I need to know from them with some type of regularity? So it's customizing communication is really what you're seeing happen, and sweeping wave of communication is happening across project management. We're getting and receiving customized communication based on our projects because we're seeing more and more hybrid happening than almost anything else in many of our projects. Now, this was put out by Pearson and Nelson in 2000, and so they talked about establishing a robust communication plan. Very true in traditional project management. They define the communication, identify the stakeholders, choose the appropriate channels. You've heard this over and over again through any of your PMBOKs. 1 through 6 handled this very, very detailed with very detailed input, outputs, and tools for doing this. But communication is defined as that process of understanding and sharing meaning. And so where you saw that very strongly in PMBOKs 1 through 6, you've seen it lighten a little bit for those of you who have purchased the PMBOK 7, which is half the size of the other PMBOKs. So what you see here is, what do we need to communicate? What makes sense for this project? And this is what you're going to see, I think, from this point on. What makes sense for this project? And of course, it's supporting the hybrid, which is going to be your Agile and Scrum. It's also supporting the traditional, where it makes sense in those projects as well. So a very simplified communication model that we need a lot of times is that, for an example, is the message that I'm sending out makes sense to me, and then I send it out, and then does it make sense in that environment, in the expertise of that person, or in the culture that this is going to, and did they receive and understand that message? Now, I've simplified this, obviously, and I know I'm singing to the choir here, but I've simplified it because this is really what you're trying to do. What makes sense to me might not make sense to you when I send it out. We see this all the time with an email in particular. We send an email out that makes so much sense, and then what happens is that other person misunderstands something. Now, we know there's let me back up here and get this up. So we know there's triple supports for project communication. First off, clarity of the message. I don't have to impress you with my big words and all the acronyms. Oh my gosh, get that junk out of your communication. You don't need all of that, because that increases the potential that somebody's going to misunderstand something. And then you're looking at organization of all material and agenda. Is this logical to who I'm sending it to? If it's not logical, does it make sense why it's not logical and why we're talking about different stuff in a different type of order? And then last, transparency from everyone. If I don't understand, I don't fear saying, you know what, I don't understand. I feel that I can say something to you, ask questions. I'm not going to be put down for asking those questions. And so we've got transparency. As we look at this, really, this triple support for communication, it allows us that opportunity to be able to really get and receive the right information. And so not be bogged down with the thought of, oh, okay, I didn't ask them the question because I didn't know really what they were talking about. I didn't feel like I could. Why is that? That's what you're wanting to make sure you get away from. So you also get into the virtual meetings. Now, by and large, most of the surveys that are coming out in the last 3 years are saying that our virtual meetings have actually gotten better. We got more organized when we got on camera. We got more organized when we were doing this thing, doing our agendas for a virtual meeting. So that part's been good. But virtual meetings, we're wanting to make sure we engage everyone, not just the people who talk a lot. We have the tools, the breakout rooms, whatever we need to be able to engage the people in a way just like you would in real life. To take 3 or 4 people and put them over in a breakout room so that they can brainstorm a solution is exactly what's happening and needed on many other projects. So you're verifying the virtual reactions. And looking at you and talking to you today, you can have any kind of reaction you want, and I don't know whether you're telling me the truth or not, because we do. We will put on a face in front of certain people in the team meeting. And so we put on a face all the time. For an example, have you ever gone to a restaurant and not liked something about the restaurant, but never complained at all? You were nice to the waiter or the waitress and you said all the positive things to them, but yet inside you thought, we're not coming back to this place. That food stunk. And I mean, all of that was said at the table, but we never complained. We never sent it back. We do something similar to that when we get into our meetings. We nod, we smile, we say all the right stuff, and walking out of the meeting, you think that was the most stupid idea I've ever heard of, but we didn't bring it up in the meeting. So being able to verify that we're all on board is an extra step when we're talking about a virtual setting, rather than just watching somebody nod their head. Nodding their head is great, but we want to make sure that we really are understanding whether they're into it and agree with it, rather than just looking at the exterior. So we have to do a deep dive a lot of times into complications with communication. We say something, but we mean something different than what somebody else thought. So let's start off with some of the complications, okay? We all experience these personally and professionally. The first is psychological barriers for project communication. Fear of failure and self-doubt. I don't say something because I doubt what I say, or I don't have it fully formulated. We get into that. You also, perfectionism or negative self-talk. If I say something negative, I feel like I'm just being Ned the negaholic, and so I don't want to do that. The imposter syndrome and cognitive bias. We have people who walk into that meeting with a bias of what they want, what they don't want. And you have people who say all the right stuff. They act like they're totally supportive. That's that imposter syndrome. And the truth is that they might not be supportive at all. They say all the right things, and it might be a manipulation kind of mindset. And then some people will lack self-compassion or social comparison because they get in there, and a lot of times what happens is somebody fails and they're almost rude about that failure or that challenge that person is having. And a lot of times they almost put them down for having that, making them feel that they're not a good person or not a good worker or not smart enough. And the truth is, as we all know, if we've been in project management, every one of us have had hiccups in a project someplace. There is no silver bullet. So we have all had these hiccups that we've had to overcome over time. Now, let's talk a little bit about the fear of failure and self-doubt. Trichophobia is the name of this, and I'm sure I didn't say it right. I practiced it the last couple of weeks. It's the fear of failure. In other words, I am so hung up on failing that I don't want to even attempt something if I'm not convinced it's going to be able to be successful in that. So people resist anything which could fail. So if it's a relationship, I'm not going to go into another relationship if I've gone through a divorce because I don't want to fail at another relationship. If it's a class, well, I'm not good at numbers, so I'm not going to take a numbers class, fear of failure. But this is not just the normal and apprehensiveness that we have. This is literally over the top to where it's almost a paralyzing state. Okay. And so failure are the finger point posts on the road to achievement. That's what C.S. Lewis said in that quote, is that it's the finger posts on the road to achievement. In other words, you're going to have to challenge some of these areas. But if you and I have failure and self-doubt over something, one of the best things is to learn about it and to try it in a couple of different ways. Because what's surprising is some of the things we have self-doubt over, we actually learn. Some of the things that we're fearful of, we actually have been able to master. And so that's what you're wanting to do. With self-doubt, a couple of other things. Berkeley Wellness out of California said this: self-doubt can be defined as the state of uncertainty about the truth of anything. And so we do. If I don't know a lot about it, we have uncertainty. You're hearing it right now with artificial intelligence. We have people who are freaking out about artificial intelligence from a negative standpoint. And there are some negatives. Don't mistake what I'm saying. Don't put our head in the sand and say there's not. Of course there is. But there's so many positive things too. They also said it could be about our thoughts, our beliefs, our emotions, our opinions, our decisions, our self-views, or any truth we hold in our minds. We have a sense that we are not stable. And so what happens is we don't feel confident on something. And by not feeling confident, we have a tendency to hold back. And you see this in project management. Let me tell you how. Management wants our projects to be perfect. They want our projects to not have any failures. I mean, the long and short, that's what we want. But the truth is nobody can run a project like that. So you're going to have challenges, you're going to have hiccups. And of course, the way to make it successful is for us to be able to work together and catch it as early as possible. Perfectionism. We want those projects to be perfect. Of course, there's no such thing. We're not perfect. Surprisingly, Wanda found that out really quick before we got married. And I was just shocked that she did not think I was perfect. And now after 30 years, she reminds me that I'm not perfect continuously with different things she will point out. But if we're wanting perfectionism, we know that's not realistic, right? I mean, we know that, but so many times we want that. So here was something David Burns, if you're not familiar with him, Burns writes a lot about emotional pieces and challenges us to think differently. And this was great, I thought, because he talked about perfectionism, but he talked about it with negative self-talk. Negative self-talk is what we tell ourselves. It's that little recorder that we have inside ourselves. And so that's how that impacts our communication, because we tell ourselves such goofy things. So here's what he said: placing high standards for all areas of their life, as well as their looks, their grooming, their actions. Perfectionism, when applied to others, can discourage and create unrealistic expectations. And this was a quote he gave: remember that fear always lurks behind perfectionism. Confronting your fears and allowing yourself the right to be human can paradoxically make you a far happier, more productive person. So how does this impact project management? We take this perfectionism and we bring it to project management. We want every project to be perfect, every project manager to be perfect. It's just like all of the coders and the people, the software designers, we want it all to be perfect, and there's no such thing. There's going to be things that work and things that do good, but we're not going to have perfection. So we have to be willing to understand there's a range of correctness that we want, but obviously we're not going to have 100% perfect in everything. So let's talk about the imposter syndrome. Dennis Whaley writes, a big time writer that you probably have read. I said something I thought was good for this. And so he said, people feel like a fraud or lacking abilities even when they experience success. Have you ever had that? Of course. I'm speaking at conferences, and a lot of times I'm thinking, man, it's cool to speak at these places, and I work really hard to have a great engagement with the people and give them a lot of information. Same thing here, but I mean, I'm a practitioner like you are. I'm trying to dig this stuff out just like you are and learn something new. But here was his quote. He said, "It is not what you are that holds you back. It is what you think you are." And so what he's saying is that a lot of times in our head, that's what happens, is that imposter syndrome. We don't feel as good. You see consultants who struggle with that. They come in, they're brilliant, but they have they struggle a little bit because once again, that imposter syndrome, it's like I'm doing and being something that I'm not really. And a lot of times you'll see that with project managers. Cognitive bias, the bias we've talked about before. Ruth Ginsburg made a statement that I thought was great, a way of filtering information that causes one to make wrong assumptions and wrong decisions. We have biases. She said, I think unconscious bias is the hardest thing to get at, because once again, we have a bias a lot of times that we don't even know that we have. And so it ends up influencing it. All of this taints our communication within a project, because I can present the same information that you do, but if I've got a bias, guess what? That bias will put a little different spin. If nothing else, by my tone, it will put a little different spin on it. And then the last little piece here was that self-compassion. People are going to fail, and so you can be someone who's building up people or tearing down people. Not that we don't confront, of course we do. But when we talk about self-compassion, strong feelings of shame, guilt, which make emotions difficult to manage. Now, we all have that. If I fail, I don't like it. You don't like it. And a lot of times, I've said this to myself, how stupid could I have been to have tried that or to do that? So, that's those negative tapes saying it to myself. So if you've experienced that, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But Elizabeth Ross, and if you've read anything by her, she's written a lot about people dying, people getting ready to die. She's written a lot about this, of how people with some of that negative self-talk. But here was her quote: people are like stained glass windows. They sparkle and shine when the sun is out, but when the darkness sets in, their true beauty is revealed only if there is a light from within. So listen, just because we have something that fails does not mean you're a failure. That event failed. That project failed. That estimate was horrible. We all have those type of things. But you know what? You're not a failure, because you're only a failure if you allow that piece to define you. And that's going to happen in communication as well. So if we allow that to define who we are, then that's going to taint everything we do in communicating and working with other people. Social comparison is what we get into so many times. I compare my abilities as a project manager, as a trainer, as a husband, as a dad, as a grandpa, to somebody else. And a lot of times that's not realistic. So measuring oneself against the skills and the abilities of others. And so what do? We normally pick somebody that is doing super great. And so what happens is, of course, we're going to be below that person because we picked somebody so high. And then Dolly Parton said this: find out who you are and do it on purpose. And so that's exactly what it comes back down to with communicating with project management. Communicate better to people, do it on purpose, communicate as clearly as you possibly can, and do it with some kindness, and to where it's not a put down, to where you help people rather than harming people with some of this. So what that brings us to is brings us into this area of cultural barriers for project communication. So like, for an example, language translation and cultural barriers. Many of you have traveled all over the world for different things. I've been blessed to be in a handful of other countries and to be able to speak, and I loved it. I love the interaction. And so I've been blessed to be able to have a variety of people in the various groups virtually. Even in a couple of weeks, I've got 50 Ukrainian project managers that will be in our 2 days of training that we're continuing. This will be the third installment of training that Tony Rusing, who I know is on this call, and I have been able to provide to the Ukrainian project managers to help them for recovery. So it's great. But I'm not foolish enough to think that they understand everything I'm talking about, because we've got the language, obviously, but we've also, and the translation, but you've got the cultural barrier. And my culture is going to be different than the Ukrainian partners that we love working with, or than somebody in Brazil that I'm speaking to. And so we have to take that in consideration. And almost all of you here, you're probably working with someone that might be global right now. Some of your vendors might be global. Some of your project managers might be on this call and you're global. So we always have to look through the eyes of cultural barriers. Now, let me chase a real quick rabbit here. Here's the thing about this, is that you're going to do your best and you'll probably mess something up. That any of us can do that. We all have with culture, because you don't even know what you don't know sometimes. But I think the thing is that give people grace when it comes to that they don't know about your culture. They don't know what that word means in your culture or in your world. That give people grace. And you know what? You can explain it to them, but I don't have to explain it in a reprimand. I can explain it as how funny it is and the two different meanings. Do it as an educational piece, not as something that's going to be scolding someone. So vocabulary and terminology differences. These type of differences, the capacity to communicate with people from diverse cultures is referred to as intercultural communication. Interacting effectively across cultural lines requires perseverance and sensitivity to one another's differences. And this is so important. That's what we're trying to do. And we're going to do that more and more in the future. As technology continues to explode, you're going to be able to talk with anybody, anywhere, almost at any time. And we can do that even now. Also, nonverbal communication. We have body language. Of course, all you're seeing from me is this part. And of course, it'd be better if you didn't see my face in most cases. I get it. But the thing is that you're trying to read my body language and my expressions chest high is what you're trying to do. And all of you who are doing virtual things, that's what we've had to do over the last several years. So it could be cultural differences that are there. For an example, some cultures give no facial expression. And then some are very expressive with everything. And so the point is, I might be talking with someone who's giving no expression. And I think, gosh, this person's just not getting it. And they might totally understand it. But once again, because our culture here has expressiveness, maybe not off the chart expressiveness, but some, we are able to communicate and understand a little bit better. So we read things a little bit different. Direct versus indirect communication. This is something that kind of connects to the cultural piece. Direct communication can be perceived sometimes in some cultures as very rude. Here in the North America, we have direct communication. We talk about, in other words, here are the 3 things you're not doing well. Here are the 3 things you need to do differently. And so that would be that direct communication. Spencer and Oatley in 2000 said this: recognizing and adapting to indirect communication norms enhances cross-cultural rapport. Because once again, that culture changes the difference. Some cultures are a little bit more relaxed and not as direct as what we might be in North America or in other places of the world as well. High effect versus low effect expression. This was another area I thought was very interesting. Cultural differences in emotional expression influence communication dynamics. Now, the thing is, obviously, there's got to be a balance here. You can't be off the chart on everything. I mean, it's going to be way too much movement. You're not swinging from a chandelier on every call. You can't get by with those kind of things. Cultivating emotional intelligence aids in interpreting and responding to diverse effective cues, because what you're trying to do is, for that person, what is the cues that I'm picking up? What are the messages that are being picked up based on their body language, their tone, and their effect in that particular call? Now, the other side that we get into, besides reading people and making sure we got the right message, is going to be the technology itself. So leveraging technology, and this is explosive for us. And so utilize collaborative tools for remote teams. And most of us have switched to some type of virtual platform to be able to do this. So you balance digital and face-to-face communications. And so the reason people are moving to this, and especially on the Agile side, is because of the idea of co-location. Co-location is a great idea. It just doesn't work for most of our organizations right now. Maybe yours is different, and so I get it. And so it's a great goal. But the challenge that you're probably getting into is that you've got a skeleton crew. And if you've heard me speak, I talk about this all the time because I think it's something that we have to think about. You have a skeleton crew, and that skeleton crew is not going to be able to be co-located and work on that one project. You're working on multiple projects. Co-location and working on a singular project is really the two that go together the best when you're talking about Agile and Scrum. And most of us don't have that privilege. It just doesn't work that way for many people. Now, if yours does, great. Then you're being able to communicate in the same room with that team continuously. With the technical barriers, you're looking at over a reliance a lot of times on digital communication, misused communication tools, lack of face-to-face interaction. So we've got digital tools. Obviously, I can email you, we can do text, we can do all these things, but all of those are still substitutes for being able to put a face on it from time to time. You need to be able to see that person. And so I'm not saying every meeting has to be face-to-face or even virtual to where we're using the video, but I am saying that you're going to need some just to once again, to reconnect that type of meaning that you have on all the digital stuff that we're sending through email and text and all of these different things. Now, you're not seeing as much of this on digital illiteracy, but as we continue to evolve, this is going to become something, once again, that we're all having to stay up on. Digital digital illiteracy refers to the need for more proficiency or knowledge in using digital technologies, navigating the digital landscape. We're hitting a barrage of different tools that are starting to come out right now. Many of you are already using these to where, for an example, in a meeting, I don't need a scribe. A meeting will take the absolute transcript of every word and cough that we have and can put it into a folder for us to be able to go back and scan or read if we need to. Plus, it will tell us everyone that was there. So we've got technology to do a job that most of us didn't like in the first place and maybe didn't do a very good job of. So we've got a lot of technologies that are coming out like this. Digital illiteracy limits individuals' participation in an increasingly technology-driven society. Why? Because people feel clumsy. So once again, is there some type of training on your tool? And most of us are picking this up, and most of our tools are very similar, but you're switching from Zoom to Microsoft to to Adobe and all of these different ones. It's going to be a little bit different, as you already know. Not something you can't learn, but once again, that learning curve is a lot of times going to be longer for some and shorter for others. With illiteracy, digital illiteracy, it encompasses a range of deficiencies, including the inability to use computers, smartphones, or other digital devices. Now, you're not seeing this happen as much with millennials that are in the workplace or Gen Xers that are in the workplace. You are still seeing it with your baby boomers that are still in the workplace a little bit, but you do have people who are not technology driven. They're just not that kind of person. And so it's not based on an age thing. It's based on a desire for being able to communicate in these ways. Being able to send emails, search the internet, use social media, all of this is second nature to most of us. Being unable to employ software applications for basic tasks, that's going to be that digital illiterate person. And what we have done is that we've created a world where we are so digital that if you have that person come along, they are so out of step. And so a lot of the communication we're giving right now that's happening moment after moment, they're not going to be able to see it. They're not going to be able to be part of that. In project management, digital illiteracy can impede an individual's ability to leverage digital tools. Now, and any kind of platform. Why? Because once again, they're not accessing it because of, once again, a comfort zone. Now, where you're going to see this is getting ready to explode. Why? Because of AI coming into this world. AI moving into project management is going to explode this to where you're getting reports from AI telling you different things about that project, and it's coming to you naturally. I'm not having to go and get it. It's coming into me instantly. It's going to have that push from the AI software coming into us to where we know what's happening on our projects instantly rather than waiting till the end of the day to go back and look. It may lead to inefficiencies, miscommunication, digital illiteracy, limited access to valuable project-related data. Why? Because I don't feel comfortable with it. And so we've got to be able to get people who are working for us over this particular hump to where they feel comfortable with the technology. Next, let's talk about the implications for education and employment. Your organization is going to invest money to educate your people, and that's going to be a piece of communication. So assessing learning resources for education and research, this is going to involve a lot of technology as well, and most organizations are switching over. Many of you have heard me speak, and I said that before COVID, 95% of the presentations, and we would speak about 120 days a year, 95% of the presentations were face-to-face, 5%, and maybe even 3% on some years was digital, like what we're doing right now through Zoom or through some type of visual platform like this. Since COVID, 95% of everything we do is this right here. 5% is 5%. So that shows how that paradigm has shifted in just since COVID of how companies are looking at this. So reducing, when you start looking at it through the technology, people are doing this to reduce travel, to let people live wherever they want to live and still be able to hire them. And so you've got limited skill development, exclusion from remote work. If I'm not comfortable with the digital platform, then I'm not going to be comfortable with working from home and trying to communicate with everybody. So we've got to be able to get people over this and educate them. So that digital divide is what everyone is calling this now. Do we have people who they have that? And you do. You have people who who this is just a clumsy area for them. And so it can manifest itself in differences in high-speed internet. And that's one of the places that you're seeing this across the Midwest. Because we don't have high-speed internet, what happens is many people lag behind on the ability to work from home or to be able to access high-speed internet. Now that's being taken care of in general through the Midwest as you start seeing more and more fiber be laid through the Midwest. But if you're in a big city someplace, or if you're in a city, you have accesses that people in the Midwest don't have. I mean, you've got a lot of farming area in the center of the United States, and there's no internet. There's no phone reception in many of those places. So the ability to use these digital tools, it's not as easy for these people. They don't have the same access. Now, factors contributing to the digital divide can include income disparity, but that's usually not it. It's the rural location piece, because what's happening is that rural location, you're so far out that your cell phone's not going to work. So you don't have any way of being able to tap into the internet. Age could be it, but age is starting to become less of an issue as more and more baby boomers retire. But educational disparity, people who maybe have not done anything with technology as they were going through school or going through college. Maybe they don't have any college. Someone said something about the farming community. Let me tell you something. The farmers have technology. They use technology to run their combines, to be able to plow, to plant, to do all kinds of things. They've got technology back at the farm in the barns where they're testing their crops. They're testing moisture levels. Farmers have gone in the direction of technology, and it has exploded in those areas for them. Now, as we look at the digital divide, a lot of different pieces of that feeds in. Now, let's go a little further and bring it right back to the communication side, okay? So information overload. If we're not careful, we've gone the other extreme. Because I can send you a message in 15 different ways, I'm using all 15 different ways. And so the thought is that, well, I'm doing it any way that they want. And that can get cumbersome to where you have information overload. Epplinger and Mingus said this, describing the abundance of digital information, cognitive overload, and reduced decision-making efficiency. He said, information overload impairs cognitive processing, diminishes the quality of decisions. Why? You got too much and you can't sort through it all. So those of you who are really cogitator kind of people, researchy people, you're getting bogged down with how much you have possibly got in front of you. And you're thinking, oh my gosh, I can't make a decision because you want it to be black or white. And of course you do. We all do. But what's happening here is that there's so much information being sent to you that you're taking more time to have to go through it all so that you can make the best decision. And that's one of the challenges that comes with that. Organizational barriers for project communication. Some organizations are more organized to be able to inform each other. Hierarchical communication structures, they can work very well with many of your traditional projects. Top-down communication and people communicate up through the line and chain of command. We can have information overload, obviously, or lack of communication policies of how and when to communicate. A lot of that can be very loose and cause people to question when and who they should be talking with. And so the point is, your organization needs to be clear on what box we have to fit in for communication. If we can talk to anybody, awesome. If we have to go up the chain of command, that's fine too. We just need to make sure we understand that. It brings us down to how clear is our message? Have you ever been misunderstood in an email or verbally where people misunderstood you? We all have, of course. You can't open your mouth today without somebody not misunderstanding possibly something. So using precise language and get away from the jargon and the acronyms and those type of things. Structure the message logically or sequential. Highlight key information. You can use visual aids or a graphic. Think about it. When you start talking about graphic, something like 50 or 60% of the people will better understand our message if we have some type of graphic in there. And so what happens is that they're more visual. Cleland and Ireland made this statement about effective communication. They said, it's about transmitting a clear message in a manner that is easily understood by the intended audience. How do you get that message from you to that audience? And so once again, the focus is not on you. You understand it. You've got the message. You're trying to make sure, how do I communicate it? So if you're communicating to a 5-year-old, think about it. How are you're going to break that message down to communicate to a 5-year-old. You're going to make it as simple as possible at a 5-year-old level. So whoever you're sending this to, you're trying to do something very similar. You're trying to break that message down to where it's going to be crystal clear to them. Now, this involves a lot of different pieces to it. Active listening and feedback mechanisms is part of it. Active participation and listening. You're looking at them, you're nodding, the active participation, active listening allows that capability for them to ask questions and for you to answer those questions without a tone, without being sarcastic with them, without it sounding like a put down. And so I can answer a question that you've asked and make it sound like you're the most stupid person in the world. And that's not what we want. We want to be able to answer the question as a question, not with all the baggage of the tone that could actually put the person on defense and cause someone else not to ask a question. Incorporating feedback into communication iterations, so that do we have the feedback systems? On the Agile side, you've seen this happen very well, where in Agile, by the time you hand something off to the customer, they have a feedback section to where they are able to give some feedback to everyone. And so with that feedback section, that allows you to be able to know what's happening or what's not happening with that project. And the customer is able to say, I like this, I don't like that. Bovee and Thrill made this statement: listening is a key component of effective communication, as it allows for better understanding and response to stakeholder concerns. How well do I listen? And listening is not just with our ears, you know that, it's with our eyes. It's with our eyes as well. And so next piece of this that we're looking at is going to be tailoring communication to the stakeholders. So as we're tailoring information to the stakeholder, we get into this thing of recognizing that some stakeholders need the information a little differently than others. Some of your people who are more researchy, they might want all the deep stuff and all the detailed stuff, but another group just looks at high level stuff. Developing that customized communication strategy means that you're communicating and giving the right information to the right people at the right time in the right manner is what you're doing with these pieces. So Gray and Larson said tailoring communication to specific stakeholder needs ensures the information is relevant, engaging, and meaningful. And so we've all gotten in those meetings where somebody gets down into the weeds and loses us. Your technology people can do this a lot of times, and you think, oh my gosh, I don't even know what that word is. And so we all have, it was way too deep for that particular meeting, possibly. And so we've all done that. Maybe you and I have done that with different type of topics. Now, managing stakeholder communication expectations. What are they expecting to get from us? Managing expectations is a much bigger deal than we think. For an example, you've got a customer who thinks they're getting a report from you once a week, and you're thinking once a month. That customer is already upset because they feel like you're not doing what you should be doing there. So setting realistic project milestones and goals with them, making sure they understand what the expectations are going to be. Transparently communicate progress and challenges. If we're doing good, it's communicated. If we're doing bad, it's communicated. Now, we've got steps of action on both of those, but the point is you're wanting to communicate freely with these. And then aligning those expectations. What's the expectation of when something is going to be back to them? What's the expectation when you're going to communicate to them? All of that's going to be very important. So Kerzner, if you're familiar with Harold Kerzner, great author, great writer and project manager, made this statement about communication. Effective communication involves managing stakeholder expectations by consistently sharing project status and potential deviations. So people trust you. They trust what you and I are saying because they believe what we're saying is the newest information and the correct information. They don't think that we've juiced it up or we've calmed it down for some particular reason. Identifying common communication challenges. So you're looking at information overload or noise that can cause people not to understand that information. Addressing language barriers, misinterpretations. So anything that you're trying that's kind of a goofy word or a goofy acronym or whatever, explain what it is. You say, well, everybody should know. Explain it the first time it pops up on your document, and then from that point on, go on without it. But the point is, you explain it in the beginning because, once again, acronyms and those things can cause people not to misunderstand something. Mitigating technical communication challenges. So Larson and Gray said a proactive approach to identifying and resolving communication barriers is essential for maintaining project clarity and accuracy. People want to look at you as a resource. And most of you, we all try very hard to do this. And most of you try very hard and do a good job with your people, but they want to look at you as someone they can trust. And if you say the project's doing this, they believe the project's really doing that. If you've ever worked with someone who didn't tell the truth or a vendor who kind of twisted it a little bit to make it sound better so that you really didn't know there was a problem, or an employee who did that, you hated those particular things continuously. And then also the role of emotional intelligence in communication. This is becoming such a big deal because emotional intelligence is engulfed in everything else. So you're developing a self-awareness and empathy with people, because once again, you're communicating both good and bad information sometimes. You're managing the emotional responses a lot of times in those situations. And so you're fostering that positive interaction with those relationships, to where, once again, this meeting is a meeting that we're looking for solutions, not just dwelling on what's gone wrong without coming to action steps or a solution for that. And then closing out the team meetings, for an example. What is it that they need to hear? If you've been to a bad team meeting, and supposedly we lose about $30 billion a year to bad team meetings because we talk a lot, but we don't really come up with solutions. At the end of that meeting, some things that will change the entire nature is summarizing the meeting, creating action items, assignments, confirming what the next steps are. And so you're wanting to make sure everybody's leaving that meeting knowing what is going to be happening, especially if something's been assigned to a person. And then also generating some post-meeting documentation that we've referred to. And then once again, conducting a meeting retrospective for continuous improvement. How can we get better in these particular areas, and being able to produce better meetings, and better meetings that's going to actually be able to help people in the future with some of these things. And then summarizing the meeting with people. Once again, going back over real fast, clicking down the checklist of who's assigned to what by the next meeting. So that provides that list of action items and who's going to be responsible. And if there's important dates that people are having to respond to be able and willing to do that particular piece. The other side of it, listing each action item, who's going to be responsible, the deadlines, highlighting the decisions, describe all follow-up activities or special issues, and then recapping the decision. So today we have made this decision, and so we'll be contacting the project sponsor about this, this, and this. You're just going through it once again, and that just once again solidifies with everything. And of course, they haven't gotten any documentation from you yet about the meeting with an action item list. They've just heard it one last time before you did this. Now, I thought this was an interesting piece here, creating action items and assignments. And of course, yours is probably much more detailed than what I could get on the PowerPoint here. But what is your action item? Who's going to be responsible? The deadline, the priority, decisions that were made, any follow-up activities, and then recap of decisions and agreements. Those are some basic things to make sure people are doing it. If you've ever had somebody come back to the meeting and they forgot what they were assigned, or they didn't do what was assigned to them, they weren't sure it was assigned to them, that's what you're trying to eliminate, because that meeting is so important to be able to do this. And then once again, confirming next steps. Think about it. In some of your meetings, we talk something to death, we finish the meeting, we come back the next week, we talk it to death again, but we're not confirming what the next step is. Ask the next steps as a team member. Okay, so we've talked about this, so what are we going to do about this? Rather than just talk, what is our next step? What is the action item? And so you're going to discuss with your team, where do we go for help? Where do we go from here? What is it that we should be doing? And then once again, verifying the resources, documenting the availability, documenting the assignments that are there. But then what you're really trying to do is you're trying to make sure that we're moving that meeting. That meeting is not just a socialization time or just a meeting. That meeting is there for the sole purpose of being able to move us into that solution kind of mindset for it. And then what are the concerns or the questions that people have in that meeting? Obviously, there's a time for questions. But the point is, we want to be able to nail those down and answer those questions. Be respectful, be kind. Even if somebody is thinking the solution needs to be something different than what we're talking about, great. But the point is, hear them out, and then we make our decision, and then we're all on the same team again. Let's move forward with that. So it's that transparency as a leader, and that focus is on the solution. We're finding a solution, not just trying to find someone to blame or find a problem to point out toward people for these. And then once again, kindness, gratitude, encouragement, all of those are things that need to be demonstrated in these meetings. We've got people who are working very hard to try to do some things. And in some cases, the experience level of their project management might not be as great for some people as it is others. And they're exploring some of these areas. So follow-up communication is very appropriate with some of these folks to ask them if they need any help. Going by and just double checking, see how they're doing. See, that builds a support around them, especially those who are just learning some some of this. Remaining positive, sharing insights, instances where they can, where maybe it wasn't so great what you did that was very similar to what they're trying. All of those builds that transparency from that new worker or that inexperienced worker to be willing to share some of these, and then express how the team positively addresses any challenges or any kind of complexity that comes up. We're there to solve the problem, not look for somebody to blame. We're not trying to slaughter somebody. We want this to be something positive. And then what you're doing too, one of the last pieces is you're starting to set the preliminary agenda. Now it's not all set, don't mistake what I'm saying here, but you are setting the agenda for the next meeting of who's been assigned what areas to be able to research and come back. You're identifying new topics, checking the performance and progress from current assignments, and you're creating a list of project topics that are going to need discussing the next time, and you're starting to already prioritize what they're going to talk about in the next week. And so that's a good piece of what you're doing in this in the assignments that you're making this week. They're going to almost be automatic the next time. And then what kind of post-meeting documentation do we really need? Some of you need more than others. There's no one size fits all because of this. And so summarizing the main points is pretty common. Detailing any open issues or problems that still need additional research or actions, that needs to be part of the next meeting. Updating everyone on the progress, showing visuals, reference material, all of that's going to be very important. But the main thing is that transparency of all of this is work in progress. This is a new version of what you're needing to look at. And so that way people know what they're looking at. So do use version control with anything that you're sending out for this, even on your agendas. You might consider version control because once again, I send an agenda out on Wednesday for our Thursday meeting. On Thursday morning early, I might have a revised agenda. So you want people to understand what they're looking at and what agendas that they're looking at. And then what are the key takeaways that people have from that meeting? And so you recap it, you emphasize on adaptability and flexibility because that is the culture for us today, and continuous learning and improvement in communication. And so how can I communicate better? How can I speak better? How can I be more clear with what we're doing and with the assignments? Now, let me stop for just a moment. I thought I saw a hand pop up and then go back down just a moment. I'm willing to answer some questions if you have it and see what we can come up with. So anybody have a question about something? Anybody have a question? All right, so let me mention a couple of things to you real quick. Next month, we're going to be talking about effectively running Scrum and Agile ceremonies. And so that's going to be November 10th. That's going to be the next webinar that we'll be doing. And then we have a public course November 8th through 9th. And so this is hybrid project management, blending traditional and Agile. This is a public course. It's $299 per person. You can sign up on our website. We already have 50 Ukrainian project managers who are supposed to be attending this. And so we're getting all of them signed up and making sure we're getting everything worked out, because once again, we're going to be doing this on Central Time, and their time zone is totally opposite of us, but they're going to be tapping in and going into the night on their time to be part of this. So we have something like 50 project managers from Ukraine who are going to be part of this particular class right here. So if you're interested in being part of that, come and be part of it. Sign up on the website. And then the last piece is we have one more PMP exam prep. And so PMP exam has made a lot of changes since 2021, since they made the initial change. And of course, they're tweaking a lot of things right now. But this will be our last boot camp that we will be having for this year. And then we will start next year with every other month, we'll have a boot camp for the PMP. And so all boot camps are going to be live, virtual, instructor-led. We're running about 97% first-time passing rate right now. And so if you're wanting to be part of this, this is a credential that you for sure will want to have for your part of your resume and part of looking for work down the road if you ever choose to do that or need to do that with the bad economy or whatever else. All right, let me stop right here. Questions from anybody? Let me thank you so much for being on this and being part of this. And those of you who if this is your first time, let me welcome you. And so you'll get a link from Kim. And so all of you who signed up, you'll get a link from Kim. Kim will allow you an opportunity to be able to download that. You can show it to your people, and of course with the notes. And so you'll be getting that. I know she's out of town. She's got a senior, and so she's doing senior stuff with her son. And so you'll probably not get the link on this until Monday for this. And so just for you to understand what's going on, because she's doing senior stuff. Let me see here. I got chat up here. Make sure I got a question from anybody.
I have a question, or not a question, but a comment, if I may.
Oh, okay, Tony, go ahead.
This was fabulous for me, because what it did was it made the information that I read come to life. And that's the exciting part of what you do in these workshops. And I've been to a bunch of them. And with your permission, I'd like to share a little story with them real quick.
Okay, go ahead.
I've been a project manager for 30 plus years. And Keith encouraged me 2 years ago, to sit for the exam. And I did. And I passed it on the first test. And anyone who's considering this needs to really take a deep dive with one of these boot camps and go and sit for the exam. I said to Keith when I passed it, if I can do this, anybody can do this, because I am a very unstructured person. Although I get a whole lot done, and I've worked on projects, as I said, for 30 plus years. But this credential will give you a freedom in your brain that will make a huge difference. So I just needed to pass that along. I appreciate you so much, Keith, for continuing, and you did it for a number of years, continuing to get me to sit for this PMP certification, which I have, and also the Associate Training Professional certification that has come through that. So thank you. And I hope all of you enjoyed this as much as I did. It was tremendous.
Thanks, Tony. Appreciate the comments, brother. All right. Thank you guys so much. I know you got a lot to do. And so God bless you guys. I hope you have a wonderful weekend with your family. And so I'll see you next month. Okay. Bye, everyone. Thank you so much.